stitching, for being very careful about everything. Stay stitching anything that has a curve to it. So the neckline on this, and this little curved edge right here. That's something that will definitely stretch out, okay? When we start sewing this in there, we give it a little clip. And that's what the stay stitching will also help with. And it releases it when we're going around that tight curve. So, facing piece. You could do your facing in a contrast wool. That might be really good. It looks fun. Like you see over there. Just gives you a little interest. This is what you're working on over the weekend. Your front, can you see that princess seam right here? So we have this whole front panel. We have side front. All the interfacing is applied to the back. Very important that you do the interfacing, apply the interfacing before you thread trace, because you don't want your threads stuck in between the interfacing, glued in there. We're stay stitching just like our facing around the neckline. Get this armhole stay stitched even though it's not there now. You want to be very careful that these don't stretch out, because some of the wool will stretch out immensely and you'll be like, my pattern's completely different. Also know that every notch is not clipped, tailor tacked. Just get very quick with your hand stitches. Doesn't have to be pretty. You're giving yourself information. It's 1, 2, and you're done. Clip. 1, 2, done. If you're very precise, you can do this in a way that you can cut both sides at once. And I would, if you have time, I would do one at a time, because things can get weird when you're doing double layers, okay? There's a way to do tailor tacks where if you have your two pieces face to face and you cut it out, doing your tailor tacks at the same time, leaving enough give in between and then separating them, you have tailor tacks both sides. So that's a thing. I can see my selvage of the wool right here, so I know that my straight grain is right there. I'm going to go ahead and mark the tops and bottom of it. So this can fit on here. I'm imagining in my head where my 1/2 inch seam allowance is gonna be, right? So if everything can fit right here with my seam allowance. So here's my straight grain line, my center front line, and I can line it up with the selvage. I'm going to give myself a mark right here and a mark below it. This is the waxy chalk. I think that, did you guys get the waxy or the chalky chalk, the powdery chalk?
Wax.
This can potentially leave a lot of residue on your wool. So try to be very conservative with it. And if you have anything else, like a chalk wheel or something, maybe go to that, but just use it sparingly. So I'm going to give myself a little, just little boops, little dash line for my center front. Sort of like patterning when you're doing this. You set up your grain line, and now I can lay this on here. I want something to hold it down really well. If you have something that's a good weight, then slap it on there. I don't want this to move around for a while because I got lots of information to trace off. I'm going to first give myself a light stitch edge, seam line. You don't have to do this, but it's helpful to keep track of things. Make sure that you put your seam allowance in there. It's like reinforcement of did I do this actually? Do I still need to do this? Otherwise, if you're pretty confident in yourself, you can just go ahead and take your ruler and line it up against the edge and do what we do just like with patterning, and we add 1/2 inch all the way around. Double check that your piece isn't moving around on you, and double check that you're not adding more than your 1/2 inch. Why is that important? Because we have a very precise turn of cloth built into the facing, and that can easily disappear if we have 5/8 instead of 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is the project to take time and pride with. So I'm going around, adding my 1/2. And for the center front panel, this is essentially all you're gonna do, besides getting the other information like notches and tailor tacks. The side front is going to be a little different. The side front is going to have a 2-inch hem on the bottom. Janine, can you put it to the next slide over there on the computer? Yeah, so right now I'm tracing off the center front piece, but the side front is the other piece that we need to do today. So it's going to be the same thing where you have the 1/2 inch all the way around, but at the bottom you don't do the normal 1/2 inch, you add 2 inches to it, and don't add any other seam allowance after that. The reason is because that gets folded up and used as our sort of built-in facing for every piece, side front, side back, and center back. And because it's 2 inches, it's going to match our 2-inch facing on the bottom of our facing, right? And we don't add any seam allowance because we are patterning a jump into our lining later. You also want to take note that the hem, that 2-inch addition to the bottom, it's mirrored. It's not perpendicular with the hemline. It doesn't go out. It is mirroring the shape of that, because if you imagine folding it upward on that hemline, it needs to match that shape. Otherwise, you're going to be cramming in excess to a smaller space, or vice versa.
What do you need?
This guy. Okay. Same deal. Establish your grain line. Make sure you have enough space in between the two for 1/2 inch seam allowance. But the other thing is be very conservative with this. Sometimes mistakes happen and you'll need to recut pieces. That's okay. It's not the end of the world if it happens. When you're positioning this, also make sure you have enough space at the bottom for your 2-inch hem addition. So this looks good right here. I'm going to get my top and bottom of my grain. I'm gonna make sure I'm not skewed from my selvage. This looks good. Grain will change the way your jacket falls, so try to be extra particular about this. Same thing, trace off 1/2 inch all the way around. Blah, blah, blah. You know this drill. You don't need to watch me do 1/2 inch around all this. But now when I get down to here, I'm going to trace off exactly that hemline. I might look in there and see if we have the powdery chalk to hand out real quick, because that would be a shame if we had a bunch of waxy lines everywhere.
I have some in my
Well, I don't need it for the sample, but I'm talking about your good jackets that you're gonna do. So when I am getting this 2-inch hem over here, I'm just gonna use the 2-inch width of the ruler, right? And place it up just like we were doing our regular seam allowance. And when I go to cut it out, I already have my 1/2 inch seam allowance drawn, right? I'm just going to fold this guy back while I cut this right here. So So I'm gonna cut down to this and then cut around it a little bit and then fold it up, lay it flat and cut the side so it's mirrored. This is gonna get thread traced after you put your little interfacing. You don't need patterns for this. This is not a patterning situation for your interfacing on these bottom pieces. Because remember, side front, side back, and center back are all gonna get the interfacing on the 2-inch hem edition. After you do the interfacing application, get it on there really well. If you haven't done interfacing where it's been successful, make sure you are using a press cloth, so maybe you go up one step higher with the heat, get a really good steam going on, make sure it opens up, starts the adhesive going, turn it on a dry heat, leave it there for 20-30 seconds, picking it up, putting it back down, because it needs to actually get into the wool fibers. Let it cool completely. Use the clapper to absorb the heat before you take it off the ironing board. It's still like sort of drying at that point. Thread traces at the hemline and on the grain. That's all it is for this piece. You need both left and right, and you're gonna stitch them to center front for Monday. Okay? We got bust notches, bust ease notches. So that means your side front is gonna be a little bit bigger than your center front. You gotta pin it together where the bottoms meet perfectly and where those notches meet perfectly. So you're easing in that extra part of the side front bust. Those are there for a reason. All of the front is going to be thread traced and tailor tacked, just like this. Apply your interfacing first. We have both pieces on this one, a big chunk and then the additional little triangle chunk. We have thread trace for a roll line, thread trace for the center front line, thread trace for the dart and pocket. You should have a buttonhole only for the right side. Buttonhole goes on the right side, you should have a buttonhole right here. Then when you stitch your princess seam together, your center front and your side front, that's going to line up. Your two pocket positions will show as your full pocket. Make sure you're lining up the seam line of your center front piece with the hemline of your side front, okay? So that edge is going to extend past that hemline of your side front by a 1/2 inch. What else? Is there anything else that anybody's wondering?
How do you mark
The holes can be a little bit tricky. So if you can, get one of the corners that's really sharp, sharpen it more if you need to. If you have a powdery chalk, you can sort of get it to get some like dust on your finger and then push it in there.
If it's like a small hole, we should make the hole bigger.
You need bigger holes, yeah, so that they can show up like that, okay?
Yeah, knitting needle pretty much is like the right size too.
You should have an awl in your patterning supplies.
I do, it's just the awl is kind of small. Like the awl made a smaller hole.
Even if you pushed it all the way through?
Mhm.
Okay. So remember that you're tailor tacking. Everybody knows how to tailor tack?
Not a clue, actually.
Okay, so single thread. And you can use double, but single is all you need. If you have 100% cotton, use that because it's toothy. It'll stick in your fabric more and not just slip out. Don't use any embroidery or silk threads, it's slippery. When you have a spot, let's say this is this hole right here we have at the top of your arm side. This matches our notch to concentrate our ease of our cap at the top here, so this is important. Also, that gorge notch, our collar punch hole, that's super important also. Once you get that marked in chalk, that chalk is eventually, hopefully, going to go fully away. But that's just a little precise mark that you need to record. So get a hand sewing needle, And all you have to do is get a few, like 3 or 4 yarns of your fabric and go in one more time. So you're gonna pick up a little bit right on that dot. It's like a 1/16 of an inch that I'm picking up, and I'm gonna go in one more time. And all I wanna do is clip that off then, and it will stay in there until I want it to come out.
Okay, so if you're like tailor tacking, like say the pocket position, do you just have to make multiple little stitches and then go back in?
Some things are thread traced. So thread tracing is just a basting stitch. You need to make lines with those and you're not marking just a single dot, right? Make sure to leave tails on your tailor tack, enough that it's not going to slip out by itself. Single thread for the thread tracing, double if you want it to be a little more substantial, a little more toothy, and then just load up your needle as much as you can. Don't use these little in-betweens. Those are for fine tailoring work. The longer the needle, the more you can load it up. But these should be big. They can be 1/2 inch stitches for all of your thread tracing, including pocket position and buttonhole position, okay?
Sometimes when you like the chalk